Hey, what's up? Nice to see you. My family and I live off-grid in a small rural town somewhere in Africa. This is my first video of hopefully many more to come, where I document the challenges and triumphs of living off-grid. We live on a tiny home, on a tiny property, on a far-off strange land called the west coast of South Africa. And basically, like most city slickers, I have a normal office job. The only difference is I don't get to sit in traffic. Basically, the only traffic that I get are scorpions and spiders and snakes on my way to the office, which is quite frankly the way I prefer it. By now, you might have guessed that I work remotely, and in this video I'd like to show you how I managed to solve the problem of having no space to work in our tiny little home, and how I managed to improve the tiny little workspace on a tiny little budget to turn it from this to this. I said tiny and little a lot, didn't I? Sorry. Okay. So I'm assuming that if you've watched up until this point that you might be interested in off-grid living and living self-sustainably, and perhaps you have your own office somewhere in a remote destination. So help a brother out and please subscribe to the channel, and that's enough begging for now. Let's get on with it. Our off-grid journey started about a year ago when we bought a 2,000 square meter property in a very small rural town on the west coast of South Africa. That's about half an acre for you Americans, just in case you were wondering. The property came with a rundown building that looked something like this. We turned it into a livable space, installed a basic solar system, planted some fruit trees, and started cultivating a food forest. But we have a long way to go, even just to become partially self-sustainable. But I digress. Back to the office space. As I've mentioned before, the house is tiny, and trying to work in an open space where my wife is homeschooling our son was a big challenge for me. I needed my own space. Our solution, at least for the time being, was to build a hut in the backyard, or as South Africans like to call it, a Wendy house. I'm not sure actually why it's called a Wendy house, but hey, whatever, let's just roll with it. So this is what my workspace used to look like, and I guess it's not all that bad, but in my mind, if I'm going to spend more than 1/3 of my day in it, I'm going to make it as comfortable and cozy as possible. My little project started out with clearing out all my stuff and stripping the shelves. I took a moment to envision what the space could look like while testing out this chaise lounge that was handed down for generations in our family. No doubt that this would come in handy for afternoon naps. And there was more stripping, mixing paint, some good beats to keep me going, and mixing more paint, and then a lot of painting. I decided to paint the walls dark grey, purely because I like it, and maybe because it makes me feel like I have my own dark bat cave. Once most of the paintwork was done, I got started on paneling the back wall. I had no idea what I was doing, but I figured it out as I went along. One of the advantages of living in a small rural community is getting to know your neighbors well. We share our resources, and in many cases we use bartering to get hold of the things we might need. For instance, one neighbor loaned me his miter saw, and another neighbor was kind enough to barter with me, and he gave me all the reclaimed timber I needed. It was more of a donation really, but I know the next time if either of them need something I can help with, I'll be more than happy to help out. So my vision was to have an attractive feature wall as a background for making YouTube content and when I have video calls with clients. This was of course easier said than done. Little did I know how much effort it would take to process all the timber. Normally, I don't like repetitive tasks, but I convinced myself to see this as a therapeutic exercise. After cutting, ripping and sanding, which seemed like countless pieces of timber, the feature wall started to look promising. I couldn't resist doing something nice with these plain pinewood shelving boards. And if you have a blowtorch, this is an easy trick anyone can do to make almost any wood more decorative. Now I don't know about you, but using a blowtorch like this is extremely satisfying for some reason. It was time to put the shelving back up again. I used timber wax to add a little more depth to the finish and to feed the wood. With the paint job done and the wood paneling almost done, I thought it was time to move in all my equipment and start getting a sense for what will go where. If there's one thing that triggers my OCD, it's messy wiring. And I've always struggled to find a good solution. But I figured I'll just let this one go and deal with it later. I think the most money I spent on this project was buying plugs and leads. I had this vision of having a convenient setup where I have an easy and convenient way to charge my devices and power all the equipment in my office. But this proved to be harder than I thought. I guess I'll have to think about this setup later as well. Next, I set out to create a few feature shelves for the wood paneled wall. I figured that it could serve two purposes. One, I can store some equipment that I use regularly and that I'll need easy access to. And two, it would help make the background more interesting when I create video content. Before I installed the feature shelves, I gave the wall panels a coat of linseed oil, which also brought out the character of the timber. And then finally it was time to put some finishing touches in place, like the mandatory pot plant and one of my favorite pieces of hiking kit, a whiskey flask, a little lighting, and I thought these two old BB guns I bought 15 years ago at a vintage store would be an interesting centerpiece. My headphones and then some lenses and equipment I use regularly are within easy reach. I've seen some really fancy charging stations on YouTube. Now this is not one of those fancy charging stations. And even if I never get any fans on YouTube, at least I'll have this fan. Sorry, that's a bad dad joke. And finally, this is how the office turned out. And as I mentioned earlier, that chaise lounge is already coming in pretty handy. No doubt, there is still a lot of work to refine things, like those messy wires that are all over the place, and there are still many things that I need storage solutions for. But maybe I'll do an update on that when I've thought of something clever. So I hope this video has been helpful to you in some way, and maybe you picked up a tip or two. If you're one of those rare individuals who want to throw off the shackles of the city and move to the country and become more self-sustainable, follow the channel and watch our journey unfold as we also go through the journey of becoming self-sustainable and living off-grid. Until next time, I'll see you out there.